Hey, mama. So today I'm going to just share a few podcasting tips for moms, but more so focusing on really creating a podcast that fits your current season of life. There's a lot of information in the podcasting space, and it can be like overwhelming trying to decide, do I need this for my podcast? Or do I need to have that? Do I need all of these different things to actually have a successful podcast? So we're going to dive into that today. All right, let's jump into today's episode. Hey, mama. Are you tired of feeling stressed and overwhelmed trying to grow your online business with your babies at home? You desire more flexibility in your day, allowing you to pour into your family, yourself, and your business without running yourself into the ground. Mama, you can build your dream business and do it in a way that fits your current season of life. And I'm going to show you exactly how. Welcome to the Mama Turned Mompreneur podcast. I'm your host, Andria Singletary, daughter of the king, wife, mama of two, and life and business coach for mompreneurs. On this podcast, you will learn business strategies made for mamas just like you, who desire to be successful CEOs and fully present mamas without stress or overwhelm. So whether you're an entrepreneur who transitioned to a mompreneur or a mama turned mompreneur, I am here to support you. So grab your coffee, notebook, and pen, put in those earbuds, and let's dig in. Okay, so let's talk about what does it actually mean to create a podcast that fits your current season of life? I wanted to talk about this because, like I said in the intro, there's so much information when it comes to, what it actually takes to have a successful podcast. And what I want to say is that you really have to find what works for you, what makes sense for you, what you can realistically commit to, right? So let's talk about do you need to post episodes, new episodes weekly, or can you get away with doing bi-weekly or seasonal or monthly or even considering a private podcast? And honestly, it's not about how often you put out the content. It's what's important is creating quality content that actually resonates with your listeners. Because podcasts are long form content, they are evergreen content, they are highly searchable. As long as what you're sharing on your podcast is still relevant, meaning that the strategies you're sharing are still effective, they make sense for the current trends in the online space or whatever it is in your niche, and how you're presenting this information is relevant to your audience, to your ideal clients. It's resonating with them. It doesn't matter how often you publish. Now, a big thing is consistency though. So if being consistent is you putting out a new episode every other week, then that is what you commit to. If it's putting out new episodes weekly, that is what you commit to. If it's putting out new episodes monthly, that is what you commit to. If it's doing a private podcast, so when it comes to private podcasts, I have a bunch of episodes on that and I'll link them in the show notes. But when it comes to a private podcast, you can decide whether you want to have just a set number of episodes for this private podcast feed and that is it. Or if it's something that you want to turn into a monthly subscription or something where you put out new content monthly, whether that's once a month, twice a month, whatever. You have options, but again, it's figuring out what works for you. What can you realistically commit to in this season of your life? Maybe right now doing a weekly podcast doesn't make sense for you. Or maybe you have the capacity to bulk record a bunch of episodes and do a seasonal podcast. A seasonal can be 10, 12 episodes, sometimes a little bit more. But it's that, okay, I just have to record these episodes and then I get a month or a 2-month break or whatever. So it's just sitting down and really looking at, okay, this is what I have on my plate. this is what I have the capacity for. This is what I have the availability to actually commit to and stick with. So that's what you have to figure out. But you have so many options. There is not one way to do it. Like, you really can have a wildly successful podcast even if you put out content less frequently. So like, even if you do like a seasonal podcast, or maybe you do, like I said, you put out new episodes every other week, you can still have a very successful podcast. It's more so just the strategy behind it. And that is why, like, in the Get It Done week, you're going to get my support with that strategy piece. So if you join the Get It Done week and you're like, Andria, you know what, I don't have the capacity to do a weekly podcast, that is okay. We're just going to make sure that the content you're creating for your podcast is very good, very intentional, really highlights your area of expertise, highlights you as the go-to person in your niche. And it's content that is going to resonate with your ideal listener. It is content that is going to direct them to a specific offer. So again, like, really thinking about those podcast goals and those intentions. Like, if you want to drive them to a specific offer, then we need to make sure we're planning podcast content that is going to do just that. So like I said, in the Get It Done week, next week, you're going to get that strategy piece too, because we are not just making podcasts for the fun of it as a hobby. No, we are going to make sure that we are creating a podcast that is going to support us with hitting our goals. So if you want to grab your spot for the Get It Done week, head over to mamaturnmompreneur.com/get it done. We are getting started on Monday. So regardless if you are like, I want to do a seasonal podcast, I want to do a weekly one, I want to put out, episodes maybe once a month, the Get It Done week can support you. So another thing I really want to touch on here is that you see a lot of times where people talk about like repurposing your podcast. And I've talked about it on the podcast, about repurposing it into other pieces of long form content. So like repurposing it for YouTube, repurposing it for, a blog, different things like that. What I want to say here is that if it doesn't make sense for your current season of life, you can add those things in later. Like when you launch your podcast, you don't have to have all the bells and whistles. And if you notice a theme in the episodes this week, that is something I'm really talking about, because I see it so often where people feel like they have to have all of these things in place before they can launch their podcast. And it's like, no, you focus on one thing at a time. So for you, it's getting that audio content out there first. Then you can add in the other things. Then you can repurpose it for YouTube if that's something you desire to do. Then you can repurpose it for a blog if that's something you desire to do. But you don't have to do it all at once, because that is overwhelming. As moms, we have limited time and capacity. And for many of us, especially when you are starting out, like your first few years, you don't have a whole team. Like, you're either doing it by yourself, or maybe you have a VA or one other team member. And so don't put that pressure on yourself. You can still yield really amazing results just with an audio only podcast. I use myself as an example. I have signed the most amazing clients through this podcast. I have landed speaking opportunities through this podcast. I've literally just at the start of this year, or January 2024, and my email inbox has been full of people either inviting me to be a guest on their podcast or inviting me to be part of their audio summit. I have had people reach out to me wanting to do an article on me and my business success. And it's all through my podcast. The theme is like, oh, I found you through your podcast. I heard you on the podcast. So I don't have a YouTube channel in the sense of where I'm putting out video content. I just started, I want to say towards the end of 2023, to start having my podcast being published to YouTube. But like I said, I just do a picture thumbnail and it's the audio. That's it. And eventually, yes, I would love to add in that video component, but right now I don't have the capacity for it. I just started back this year doing blogging, and I'm only doing like 2 blogs per month because that is what I have in this season of like my capacity and the time that I have available. Yes, I did switch the format of my show notes, but this is at over 100 episodes in. I didn't do that back at episode 1 because I didn't have the capacity for it. It didn't make sense for my current season of life. So these are things that you can add further down the line. Like, you don't have to have it all at day 1, at episode 1. If you know that these are things that you want to add, then put it off to the side and then reevaluate in 3 to 6 months to see if maybe you have more of the capacity to do it. Or maybe you are, your business has grown and you now have the budget to pay someone to do it for you. But please don't hold off on launching your podcast because you feel that you have to have everything to launch it. You don't. You really don't. So that is like what I wanted to share in this episode. I'm trying to keep the episodes this week short and sweet. I don't know if I'll be able to do that, but that is the goal. But really, just at the end of the day, look at your current season of life and what makes sense. Look at your actual capacity. Look at your actual availability. Like, how much time do you have to commit? And another thing I want to throw in here too is that your episodes don't have to be super long. Like, you can do 15-minute or less episodes. Shoot, there's one podcast that I have checked out, and some of her episodes are like 3 minutes long, but they're effective. She's providing great value. So you don't have to have super long episodes. Like, you literally can break them up into like bite-sized pieces for your listeners. And especially just considering like who your listeners are, like, they probably don't have the time to listen to hour-long episodes, especially if they're either busy moms, busy entrepreneurs, or whoever. So you don't have to have super long episodes too. Like, that is another thing. Like, you can do 10-minute episodes and still have amazing results. It's all about the quality of the content and making sure that the message behind it, what you're saying to your audience, resonates with them, and it's what they actually need to hear and want to hear. That's it. All right. There's still time to join the Get It Done week. We get started on Monday. I am so excited about this because we're launching your podcast in 7 days. Like, I'm so excited. So if you want to grab your spot, head on over to mamaturnmompreneur.com/get it done. And this is also going to be linked below down in the episode description and the show notes. All right, Mama, I'll catch you in the next episode. Well, Mama, that's a wrap on today's episode. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to hang with me. If you enjoyed today's episode, will you do me a favor and follow the podcast and leave a review? Hitting that follow button and sharing your thoughts about the podcast are the best ways to ensure that other mamas like you find this show. Your review also lets me know if you're enjoying this podcast, so make sure to share your thoughts before you go. All right, Mama, I'll catch you in the next episode.